Welcome to the Platform Podcast, Episode 1. Today we welcome Gene Kim. Gene is a best-selling author, researcher, and multiple award-winning CTO. He has been studying high-performing technology organizations since 1999. He is the author of 6 books, including The Unicorn Project, and co-author of the award-winning Accelerate book, the DevOps Handbook, and the Phoenix Project. Since 2014, Gene has been the founder and organizer of the DevOps Enterprise Summit, studying the technology transformations of large, complex organizations. Today's episode is sponsored by Accelerate. My name is Kevin Austin. Welcome, Gene Kim.
Great to be here. Good to see you again. What is my story? For sure. So I've spent the last 25 years studying high-performing technology organizations, and so that was a journey that started back when I was the CTO and founder of a company called Tripwire in the information security and compliance space. And so we had studied these amazing organizations that had the best project due date performance and development, the best operational reliability and stability in ops, and the best posture of security and compliance. And so naturally, we wanted to understand how did those amazing organizations make their good to great transformation so that we could understand how other organizations could replicate those amazing outcomes. And so in that 25-year journey, you can imagine there were many surprises, but by far the biggest surprise was, it took me into the middle of the DevOps movement, which I think is so urgent and important. And I can't overstate just how much I've learned in that journey. So I co-authored a book called The Phoenix Project that came out in 2013. The DevOps Handbook came out in 2016. It was so fun doing the Unicorn Project, which was the Phoenix Project retold, but from a developer perspective instead of the ops perspective. I spent the last 4 years working on a book with Dr. Stephen Spear, who was one of those prominent researchers of the Toyota production system, starting way back in the 90s. And for the last 10, 11 years, I've been running a conference called the DevOps Enterprise Summit, now known as the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit. So we've done 21 conferences. We've had over 1,000 experience reports from technology leaders who are taking DevOps principles and patterns and using it to win in the marketplace. And I think it's been so rewarding to see that, maybe no surprise, in this world of generative AI, of which I haven't had this much fun in technology for maybe ever. It's like a third of this community have been tapped to lead or are significantly contributing to, the most important Gen AI initiatives of their organizations, of which I think is, basically happening everywhere. Anyway, so that's what I've been working on. How am I doing, Kevin?
Well, this is your platform, Gene. Thank you for sharing. So your journey's been quite remarkable. Authoring best-selling books, the research, what you've done, conference, events, it seems a relentless pursuit, certainly of knowledge sharing. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced on your journey?
Oh yeah, yeah. You had mentioned the research. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm most professionally proud of is working with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble on the state of DevOps research. And so that was a cross-population study that spanned over 36,000 respondents over 6 years. And the goal was really to understand, what does high performance look like, and what are the characteristics of high performers, and maybe more importantly, what are the behaviors that enable or predict performance. And the reason why that was so interesting was that when so many of us saw the 2009 presentation from John Allspaw and Paul Hammond saying they're doing 10 deploys a day every day at Flickr, I think it was just preposterous. It was ridiculous sounding, but maybe more importantly, it sounded irresponsible and reckless and maybe even immoral. And I was part of that group that was exactly saying that's amazing, but it sounds crazy. And yet over the next couple of years, the evidence that suggested that in order to do really great work in development and infrastructure for that matter, we need to do smaller deployments more frequently. And so this is really kind of the place for these kind of cross-population studies, where you can actually sort of look at a broad survey of practice and really kind of start teasing out what do high performers look like, and what are the behaviors and norms that are associated with those high performers. And so, just for 6 years in a row, what we found was that these high performers are just they were deploying more frequently. They needed less time to deploy, 1 hour versus, days, weeks, or even months. They were deploying multiple times a day. So Flickr wasn't the only one, right? It was actually, something like 15% of organizations were doing multiple deployments per day. And, against all our expectations, it wasn't causing chaos and carnage and disruption all the time. It was actually, they had 7 times higher change, 7 times lower change failure rates. They could fix things in 1 hour or less versus, hours or days or maybe even weeks. And working with Nicole, Dr. Forsgren, we eventually, started honing in on other measures of quality. They had better because they were integrating information security objectives into everyone's daily work. They were spending only 1/2 the amount of time remediating security outcomes. Astonishingly, these amazing organizations not just had these great technical measures, but they were twice as likely to achieve profitability, market share, and productivity goals. They were twice as likely to have employees recommend their places as a great place to work to their colleagues and friends, as measured by the Employee Net Promoter Score. So all these, kind of amazing discoveries kind of gave us evidence that said, DevOps isn't crazy, right? This is actually how we win in the marketplace. And the fact that all of these things could be actually traced back to lean principles, things that we could observe in other industries, like in the Toyota production process, that just made it so satisfying. So that was just one of the most amazing learning experiences, and really helped set the stage for the work I got to do with Dr. Stephen Spear, right, who is the expert in, not just lean in the Toyota production system, but in engine design at Pratt & Whitney, at helping build a safety culture at Alcoa, one of the world's largest aluminum manufacturers, and so forth. Anyway, so I think that kind of research was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done.
The research you did with the state of DevOps over a number of years, and then along came the Accelerate book. At what point did you think, at what point did the Accelerate book come to life?
Yeah, I think so that must have been around 2016. Yeah, so you might recall in the State of DevOps research reports, there were probably about 20 pages, right? And so there's only so much information you can put into kind of I wouldn't call it a pamphlet, but I mean, it was definitely meant to be, very easy to read, lots of sort of infographics, focusing on the sort of like the headliner statistics, right? The difference between high performers and low performers. And that's not really a great vehicle to be able to go into the mechanics of how does one conduct a cross-population study, and at what point can you assert that we go beyond correlation into causation and all that thing. So, the right vehicle for that seemed to be a book, and Nicole had just a tremendous appetite to do that, and I loved it. I mean, it was just she was definitely the lead author in that, and it was just I think a fantastic book, because it really did two things. One, it really taught us about what are the, we call it the 3 things, right, that enable performance. It was the technical practices, so it's like CI, CD, proactive telemetry, and so forth. There's the architectural practices, to what, I would sort of say those are not just the mechanisms that allow us to work independently of each other, but we've kind of, in the Wiring the Winning Organization book that I did with Steve Spear, we were actually saying architecture is the way that organizations are wired. And because of Conway's law, there's an isomorphism between, the organization and the software that, we create. And then the third one is culture norms. And so those 3 things, right, are what enable high performance. And so, I think it was just a fantastic thesis that simultaneously taught us kind of like what mechanisms were important and why, right? And also, really taught how to conduct, kind of experiments like this. So I thought it's such a great book.
It is such a great book. It's been the centerpiece to most conversations I've had over recent years. And in the book, you discuss the importance of measuring performance, and you've touched on some of those key metrics. Just before we move into discussing Wiring the Winning Organization, your recent work, you touched on DevOps there. So DevOps become a critical aspect of modern IT and software development. I guess for people coming quite new to this, what is DevOps and what are some of the common misconceptions about DevOps that you've encountered?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. What is DevOps? I mean, so I take I gave a very clinical description of the definition of DevOps that we've used over the years, including Accelerate, right? It's the technical practices, cultural norms, and architectural practices that enable high performance. And so, John Smart, his take on it was it's better value, sooner, safer, and happier. That's also, I think, a great definition. But I would kind of put the umbrella even wider and say, DevOps is really kind of the opposite of doing things in all the bad ways, right? And so it's the opposite of doing things in large batches is doing things in a way that deprive everyone of feedback. It's the opposite of putting all of us into little boxes where we can only work on small pieces of the system, right? That guarantee that we get bad outcomes. So uh yeah, and I say that just because in the Phoenix Project, right? So that's a business fable that about a fictitious company called Parts Unlimited, an automotive is an automotive parts manufacturer and retailer, that managed to screw up the most important project. And actually, it's in the beginning, it's kind of viewed as just an IT issue, where it turns out it's actually an organizational jeopardizing issue, right? That the entire company's survival is on the line. And I think the fact that it resonated with so many people across every industry vertical, across every company size, age of organization, just shows that there's a universality to these type of things. That if you organize people in a certain way, you are guaranteed to get bad outcomes, right? And that's because of the wiring, right? It's if you deprive people of feedback, if the feedback goes to the wrong place, if you divide up the work so that right, no one actually has
Yeah.
the entire responsibility for the build and run. And if you never make time for um, practicing high stakes work in non-production environments, right? Instead of in planning and practice, that's it's so much inherently safer. You're just guaranteed to fail, and so I think that says that to me, DevOps is the enablement of those opposite of those conditions. So that's very much consistent with all the work done in, described in, the State of DevOps Research and Accelerate, kind of the narratives and Phoenix Project and Unicorn Project. And, I think what I learned over the last 4 years working with Steve is that, there's really all these universal, across every kind of framework, like whether it's Agile or DevOps or Toyota Production System or Lean or resilience engineering, there's only just a handful of mechanisms at work that allow organizations to be great.
Allowing organizations to be great. You touched it. The Phoenix Project, the Unicorn Project, the Accelerate book, all resonated with so many people beyond the technology, beyond that technology sphere, in a way that I'd never quite seen, before. So how do you see, how do you see the role of leadership evolving in high performance technology organizations?
Yeah. So, in the last 4 years, it's really emerged that leaders are responsible for wiring their organization, which almost preordain what the outcomes are. And as Winston Churchill famously said, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. So too do leaders, wire their organizations and create the organizational wiring. And without a lot of uh, sensitivity and fearlessness and really caring a lot, that wiring can forever shape us. And what I've learned is that there's really three axes of kind of greatness. One is this notion of like independence of action. In other words, in the ideal, everyone's solving important problems all the time and ideally in parallel, right? And that's made possible because everyone has what they need when they need it. They can get it from who they expect it from, and it's in the right format. And so, like, there's things like decision rights and approvals and requirements and data. So that they can do what needs to get done. And the not ideal is that no one has what they need ever, right? And even when they get it, it's not at the right time, it's not in the right format, and they didn't get it from where they expect. They had to like scour and scavenge and cajole and politic. And so, those are the conditions where even small efforts require, super heroic work, right? So in the Phoenix project, it was that, one VM, to get a VM required 45 different steps from, maybe 7 different work centers, right? So that's not great. And by the way, a more recent example that I've just become very sensitive to. We wrote this up in a white paper called the Checkbox Project. Imagine a mobile telco carrier that has tens of millions of customers, and their number one initiative is to present a checkbox to their every customer so they can opt into a $5 a month service, like get email or watch movies. The problem is that it has to cross 20 different teams across 4 different customer channels. It requires is estimated to cost $28 million. It requires CEO minus 1 level support, daily war room meetings, 12 months. And the bad part is most people give it a 20% chance of success because the first 2 times they tried it, it failed, right? So that's
Yeah.
an example like where everyone's stuck. So that's one axis, independence of action. The second element of magic is that there's energetic feedback loops everywhere, where even weak signals of failure are amplified so that people can act upon them, quickly, decisively to quickly detect, correct, and ideally prevent. And that requires that people are getting feedback in all their work, and that means that feedback is going to the right people, right? So it's not that it's not the case that developers have to open up a ticket to get access to the production logs, right? That used to be a thing. And so, not ideal is that these feedback loops are weak, slow, or maybe even non-existent. And
Yeah.
when leadership gets these signals, they do things that somehow suppress, constrain, or even extinguish those signals, right?
Yeah.
Because there's not
Yeah.
psychological safety. And then the third one is, there's enough time for scheduling important, risky work so that we don't do it in production. Instead, we're doing it in planning and practice, that we make time for improvement. Call it slowification. And so like whenever you're seeing people do high stakes work, they have to have invested in slowification, in planning and practice, because under those highly consequential situations, like you can't learn in production because every mistake causes catastrophe. So therefore, right, they have to have done it in planning and practice. And so not ideal is that that time is never made. We don't pay down technical debt. We don't do things like chaos engineering, right? So that means all our hard lessons are having to be learned during the production incident, right? Or the security incident. And that's the worst time to learn. In fact, I arguably, if every mistake is highly consequential, it means that you actually can't iterate, which means you can't learn, right? So it means that requires slowification. How am I doing, Kevin?
Fantastic, Jim. You talked about every mistake is highly consequential. And when we look at Wellstrom's organizational culture model,
Mm.
in that power orientated, who here knows a friend that works in an organization like this? So we will have many people that are on that left side of the model. So when they read your work and they hear all of the inspiring things that you are sharing with them, what's some advice you share with them to how do they even begin to get started when some of those potential learnings are highly consequential? So what's your advice to help them just begin to think about getting started?
Great question. If I can take like maybe a 1-minute segue to answer that. So in the Wiring the Winning Organization book, one of the things that Steve proposed that I initially did not understand why we needed it in the beginning was the notion of like where we work. And basically, the notion is that in any domain, there's really 3 layers of which we perform work. Layer 1 is the work in front of us. So that could be the code. It could be the binary running in production. It could be the patient. It could be, what's being assembled in front of us. So layer 2 is the tools and technologies. So that could be, it could be the MRI machine, the CAT scanner, the IDE, the Kubernetes platform. And then layer 3 is really the organizational wiring. That really describes the social circuitry of which teams talk to each other. So it's the processes, the procedures, the norms, it's the structure, it's the architecture. And that is where we would put in things like the Western organizational cultural model. And so I had mentioned really those three dimensions of performance. The first one is slowification, right? Can we do things not in production, but doing it planning and practice? Simplification is really about how can we partition the problems so that they are easier to solve. So that's things like modularization or linearization for sequential work. And the third one is amplification. And I think what's interesting about I'm such a fan of Dr. Ron Westrom. I mean, it shows up prominently in all our work. And but as Dr. Westrom said, culture is gossamer and ethereal, meaning it's not concrete. And if something's not concrete, it's very difficult to talk about. And so the treatment in the book with Steve Spear is we talk about those things as information theory. So Dr. Claude Shannon talked about how signals must be generated, transmitted, most importantly, received. Right? We measure all successful communications by the receiver. Is it acted upon, and was it sort of validated that actually the help was delivered, the problem solved? And what I love about that is that we can express all the things that Dr. Weston was describing in his typology model through signals, right? And so, in other words, in my experience, it's actually fantastic. It's a fantastic diagnostic, is to say, when we have a quote cultural problem, is this a signal generation problem? In other words, do we just not know? Is it a transmission problem? Like someone knew but chose not to transmit it because it's not safe to tell bad news, right? Is it a reception problem? Did the receiver not receive the message, or is it a prioritization problem? Did they not act upon it, because they didn't think it was actually important, or is this a validation problem? And so, like in so many of the concepts in the Wiring the Winning Organization book, it's something that I think engineers, by making it look like an engineering problem, we as engineers, it makes it very easy to kind of generate engineering fixes. And so, yeah, to answer your question, so what would the advice be if we find that the organization that our friend is in is kind of in that sort of pathological organization that Dr. Westman talks about, where it's not safe to tell bad news, messengers of bad news are shot. We discourage bridging between teams. I think we can say, all right, is this a signal trends generation problem? In other words, are we just not learning about the news fast enough or early enough, right? We want to find out about problems when they're little, right? Not large and on fire. Is this a signal transmission problem, right? Have we created a system where leaders have inadvertently, or maybe on purpose, right, create a system where we just suppress signals that people don't want to hear, right? And so, there's things that we can do about that, right? We celebrate things that we need to hear, right? Like early detection of problems, how problems were fixed, proactive things that we can do in the future, right, to prevent these things from one starting, let alone snowballing, let alone catching everything on fire. Is this a reception problem, right? In other words, are there things that we need to do to make sure that those leaders are hearing the right things at the right time? Is it a prioritization problem? Is like, do we need to bump up the priority of non-functional requirements? Do we need more evidence there, right, that these things are actually making a difference? And maybe it's hey, we did all this work, but we never actually bothered to check, right, if we actually solved the right problem. Anyway, so I hope that these tools give people some more diagnostics and more prescriptive tools that they can bring to bear, when there's quote cultural problems, that we can actually turn it into sort of like an engineering problem that I'm hoping will be more not just equally accessible, but something that is more amenable to problem solving and problem fixing.
On the problem solving and problem fixing, the energy and passion that you bring to your talks, to everything that you do, which is distinctly evident even in your writing. So many people get so much from your research, your work, and everything that you share. I'm curious, when did you first fall in love with what you do, and who had the most impact on you at that time?
Interesting. I think so for the Phoenix Project, that came out in 2013, but that wasn't my first book. It's probably the most well known. I mean, I think it'll be crossing over 1 million copies, if not this year, next year. So that's something I'm really proud of. But my was actually the authorship team was um, George Spafford and Kevin Bear, and we actually did a book together in 2004, so 9 years prior. Called the Visible Ops Handbook, and the subtitle was creating world-class IT operations using ITIL in 4 steps or something like that.
Yeah.
And the insight there was that the best-in-class security organizations were those that worked most closely with ops, and the best operations organizations were those that were also working with security, because they had a common objective, right? Create reliable services that are secure and auditable. So you can imagine how that was actually the perfect place to be studying, because it turns out there's another very important partner called development in that value stream. And so that was so much influenced by the work of oh my gosh, this is actually bringing back some memories. So I remember being with Kevin Bear in, I think it was Atlanta in 2001. Oh, it must have been 2002. And we are reading Dr. Stephen Spears' 1999 Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System that came out. It was a Harvard Business Review article, which my understanding is still the most downloaded article of all time, from HBR.
Hmm.
Anyway, it was just the whole notion that people are working inside of a community of scientists, constantly solving problems all the time. I mean, it was such a vivid description of what we had also been seeing in the operations and security community. And then, so that was certainly one thing that just inspired us in the early 2000s. But another one was also the goal. So obviously the Phoenix Project has modeled, and it's really an homage to
Yeah.
one of my favorite books of all time called The Goal, written by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt.
Hmm.
For those of you who don't know, it's a novel, a business fable that's based on a plant manager, a manufacturing plant manager who has to fix his cost and due date issues in 90 days. Otherwise, they shut the plant down. And so, uh, you know, all of us loved The Goal. And so
Yeah.
our dream was essentially write the goal for IT. That was actually the working title of the book. And we worked on that for, I mean, our earliest notes go back almost a decade before, the Phoenix Project came out. Anyway, so yeah, it's like I cannot tell you just how, I can't overstate just how much, Dr. Goldratt and Dr. Spear had on our work, even 20 years ago.
The goal certainly has had an impact right across our community for sure, and it's evident in some of the work that you've been doing. Uh, Thanks for sharing, Jane. Before we get on to where you go next, uh, we've got one question here that says, knowing what you know now and seeing what you've achieved, if you could speak to your 14-year-old self, what would you say?
Yeah, if I could speak to my 14-year-old self. In fact, I was telling my 16-year-old this before, he's doing a summer internship on the East Coast of the US here. And essentially I was telling him, I was like, at your age, you really don't know what you will be good at, and you don't know maybe what you want to do. So the best, I feel like what I've been most fortunate in is that I was always able to work with really smart people working on really important, interesting things, who were, ambitious, and they were looking for, people who could help them on that. And so, like, I was a summer intern at Sun Microsystems when I was in high school, and that's where I got to be a system administrator. I got to learn about QA and helping build test suites for the Sun OS file system. Um, and that's what led me to work for Dr. Gene Spafford. So I remember reading his paper after the fallout from the Morris worm in 1988, right? And so he was the most prolific author, really studying kind of how did that happen? How do you create better tools to detect and correct and maybe ideally prevent? And so I ended up working for him as in an independent study project at Purdue University, and that eventually we commercialized to create Tripwire, the organization. So I think there's a saying that so much of your outcomes is dependent upon the company you keep, and so especially early in your life. Right. I think the most important thing to do is find people working on interesting problems and do whatever you can to help. I think that will shape your interests. It will shape your skills. Yeah, so I think it's that's probably well known, in the research, right? Is that who your mentors are have just a disproportionate impact on the work that you do and the work you get even exposed to.
Yeah. It's that what you're exposed to. I think you've just by that answered a few of the other questions, so I'm just crossing those off around the mentors and the company you keep. So that's the story so far. And you got Wiring the Winning Organization, which has been tremendously well received. Where do you see the field of organizational change heading in the next 5 years? Before they started, Gen AI came up within the first 3 seconds. So where do you see the field of organizational change heading in the next 5 years? And yeah,
Yeah,
what's happening?
I can't overstate just how much I learned working on the Wiring the Winning Organization book. I mean, to massively simplify, the fact that I got to work with Dr. Stephen Spear, who influenced me so much, 20 years prior, and to be able to work on a book together, it was amazing. And if you take a look at the Venn diagram of like our work, to again massively overstate, I come from software and he comes from hardware, right? You would think that we have nothing in common in terms of common beliefs, common observations, but that overlap was large enough where we actually because we've all read the same papers, we've all studied the same case studies, or at least enough of them that we could. It was just an exhilarating experience to be able to say, oh, the same phenomenon in these two different areas, whether it's in auto manufacturing or in software delivery, they're actually the same mechanism. That they're really, those are two examples of convergent evolution, where two species sort of independently evolved and developed certain features like wings or uh, um, uh, you know, uh, living in sea, not land, or maybe it's the other way around, living on land, not sea. Um, and so that was just amazing. I feel like I will spend the rest of my career just better understanding, those three mechanisms: slowification, simplification, and amplification. And I think for technology leaders, it is without a doubt, the job of the technology leader is becoming more challenging because the number of functional specialties keep growing. Like here's like one kind of insight, this searing aha moment that I learned from Steve. So we have 25 case studies in the book, of which only 20% are technology related. The one that we actually have the most of is healthcare, specifically emergency departments, which are just notorious for kind of these non-winning conditions, that no one has what they need when they need it in the right format at the right time. And the result is that you have these kind of horrendous, accident rates, in emergency departments. In fact, there's a high single digit, low double digit percentage that you will leave the emergency department in worse shape than when you entered it. So, that's not good. But amazingly, apparently it wasn't always this way, that in the 1950s, they were actually very safe, predictable and safe. And the theory, the causation, what Steve suggested was that it's because it was actually it was a much simpler system. There were essentially two functional specialties: doctors and nurses. So that's at layer one. At layer two, you had very little technology. You had maybe X-ray machines, which aren't very complicated. They're not very, it's kind of slow moving, right? In terms of frequency, which means you don't need a very sophisticated layer three organizational wiring to coordinate everyone's actions. So you fast forward in time 70 years, and now you have scores of functional specialties, among the clinicians. You have nurses, you have supply chain, pharmacy. So that's at layer one. And then and the technology organization, right? Because you have a ton more things in layer two, right? You have all these IT systems,
Yeah.
patient record systems. You have CAT scans, MRI machines. It's called radiology, it's called imaging, not radiology, right? Because it's not just X-ray machines, right? That's just blood tracers. So imagine just how much more sophisticated the layer three wiring must be in order to coordinate, everyone's actions so that they work as a coherent whole. And so, that same phenomenon, and so the failure of having a sophisticated enough layer three system is that you end up with these, very unsafe healthcare systems in emergency departments. So the same thing is happening in technology. We have ever more functional silos. You have more specialties. Like it's not just containers and Kubernetes and observability, and now you have generative AI and prompt engineering and ML ops, and you have these, so that anyone who says the job of platform teams, right? All these things required to enable developer productivity, right, it requires more and more sophisticated organizational wiring. And like, what does rewiring mean? Like, you take a look at, I'm fascinated by I listened to the talk by Evan Morikawa. He was the engineering lead for ChatGPT, and so he's describing what it took to, scale capacity. The fastest service to 100 million users. Full stack engineering. This was like a small team. Ran on Kubernetes, and full stack to them meant they had to go not just to the metal, but into the GPUs to understand where the performance bottlenecks were, right? And they had to deal with people trying to abuse the surface and so forth, right? So my point here is that, I think that's a hint of what many of us are going to be working on in the future, where we have these kind of ever widening, sort of specialties that we need to integrate to build the services to help our organizations win in the marketplace. So the job of technology leaders is not getting any easier. And so I can imagine just spending not just the next 5 years, but the rest of my career, just studying kind of how do the best leaders wire and rewire their organizations to to adapt and win.
We touched on the future for a second, and just before I let you go off onto your day, running an organization, well received. You've just touched on it there. So, what projects are you currently working on, and what can we expect from you in the near future?
Yeah, so we have the upcoming Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit that's coming up in August. So it's August 20 to the 22nd in Las Vegas. And so we've renamed the DevOps Enterprise Summit to the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit, just because a lot of people said that they're trying to get their friends to go, and they said, "Why would I want to go to a conference that's all about configuring CI pipelines?" It's like, oh, it's like 10 years ago, DevOps had a much broader, connotation and meaning. So, same programming, but different name. Just really trying to, show that this is about leaders improving, the parts of their socio-technical system, and it's about experience reports showing how people do that, and subject matter experts like in generative AI and about leadership development, both for leaders teams as well as for themselves. So that's coming up. I'm really excited about that. In fact, by the way, I had mentioned just how much fun I'm having with Gen AI these days. I mean, it's just we live in an age of miracles. Things that were things that I was talking to Steve Yegi, who's presenting at the conference. So the person who famously chronicled the Bezos API memo. He was saying there are projects now, their CTO said, that would have taken an intern a whole summer, now takes one day. I think that really resonated with me. I mean, it's just all our work is changing, and so Brian Neff and Dan Neff and Brian Scott from Adobe. They are actually chartered to help create the governance and rollout processes for all things Gen AI at Adobe, one of the world's largest software companies. So you can imagine there's nearly 10,000 engineers and creators who are clamoring to get this stuff, and their goal is to maximize liberty and also maximize responsibility, and try to make developers as productive as they can be, and get the organization as fast as the business wants them to be. And it's just so they're working with this vast cross-functional team, including legal and privacy and security and audit. It's just I can't tell you just how amazed and in awe I am of these people who are just on the vanguard of the most important business and technology issues. Anyway, just we have a phenomenal lineup, and I'll send you the links so you can put in the show notes. And I'm just so proud of the programming. And I just have it feels like this infinite list of things I want to write in terms of everywhere I look. I've been reading some of my favorite books, looking at my favorite case studies, and just viewing through the lens of slowifying, simplifying, and amplifying. And it's just such an exhilarating feeling, just to kind of this feeling of being able to better understand those case studies, because now I can see more clearly those mechanisms. So, so I can see myself doing that for years, 5 years, maybe more.
Gene, thank you for the discussion. So, Gene Kim, this has been your platform. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Kevin. And congratulations on getting this podcast running. And I cannot wait to catch the episodes that you have lined up.
Thanks to Gene for today's discussion. If you have enjoyed this episode, please like, follow, and share. My name is Kevin Austin, and I've been speaking with Gene Kim. If you got this far, thank you for your support to listen and engage with our podcast. We hope to welcome you back on the next episode of the Platform Podcast. And if you're still listening and you're interested in being a guest or a host, please get in touch. We aim to create a platform that is accessible to all. Thank you.